In fact, yes, I wrote this piece because I thought it's really important to think more about the diversity of skills of individuals who should be appointed to the Constitutional Court. And I think there's been too little discussion in the South African discourse around that question. And it seemed to me unfortunate that in recent years it's been thought that only practitioners could be appointed to become judges, and then judges from lower court judges to high court judges. And actually, there has been, in a sense, a decision effectively to not have academics as part of the Constitutional Court, or at least those who haven't previously served as judges. And I wanted to write this piece to kind of argue that academics can bring strong skills that others do not necessarily have to the judiciary. I'm not arguing for a Constitutional Court only of academics. I think practitioners bring their own unique experience. But I think that academics, for instance, I've just written a book. It took me 5 years to write a book. Academics spend a long time doing research. The depth of experience they bring, the reference to multiple disciplines, the engagement with comparative jurisdictions across the world make them relatively well placed to be judges on the Constitutional Court. And the Constitutional Court also has a relatively unique role in our polity. It is tasked with interpreting the law at the highest level. It can strike down acts of parliament, and ultimately it is concerned with ensuring the law conforms with the dictates of justice. And academics ultimately think a lot about those kinds of questions of whether the law in fact does meet the tenets of justice. And so it seems to me that the skills of academics are well suited to appointment to constitutional courts. And this is precisely why we see in various parts of the world, such as Germany and Colombia, another global south country, there isn't a sense in which academics cannot be on the highest court. In fact, there is a respect for the learning of academics, and a number of academics are appointed to these courts. And that is in fact true of South Africa too, right? Some of our early judges, our most famous judges, Justice Mogoro, Justice O'Regan, Justice Sachs, all had strong academic backgrounds. And more recently, we had just retirement of, for example, Justice Cameron. And so it seems to me that there is really a need to rethink about whether or not there should be more academics on the Constitutional Court.
Right. But is there not a logical and even perhaps a reasonable flow in appointing judges who have in fact served in lower courts to the bench at the highest court in the land, given the years of adjudicative experience one would have obtained at such a point? It may in fact just be speaking to the needs of the country at the time.
Well, there's definitely a role for an importance of appointing judges who've previously served. Those judges will have deep experience in the courts, in the court processes, in what's happening in the lower courts, in an understanding of the law, what's happening throughout the judicial system as a whole. And so I absolutely think that's a critical element of those appointed to the highest court. I'm arguing that there should be some academics on the Constitutional Court, and academics are not necessarily well suited to the lower courts. The lower courts are, in fact, it's not that academics can't do it, but they are very much about, in a way, applying the existing law to the factual situations. They are about, they are bound by the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court's rulings. They themselves, in a sense, are often under quite a lot of pressure, and they can't do the very deep reflection that the Constitutional Court does. And that's why specifically academics are well suited to go to the Constitutional Court and not necessarily to do prior lower court experience. I'm not saying that academics couldn't do that, but I think that they are particularly well suited to the highest court because the highest court engages with those deep questions of justice, of the deepest principles of our law, requires a depth of theory and understanding of what else is done in other parts of the world as well. And so that seems to me that academics would add a unique component and complement the skills of existing judges and practitioners who are appointed to the Constitutional Court.
looking back at the interviews that were conducted towards the end of last year, I wonder if academics are proffering up their skills or proffering up themselves as candidates or nominees for these positions as well, or as a unit, have they not sidelined themselves?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think, unfortunately, some of the way in which the interviews have been conducted, and we know there had to be a rerun of the interviews, and the failure to, in a sense, unacceptable attacks, and the approach of the Judicial Service Commission. Certainly, I think many judges even have been deterred from going before the Judicial Services Commission to move, to the high echelons of power, and I think in the Constitutional Court. And so it seems to me that there may be a deterrence to some extent because people actually who, spend their times engaging with legal principles, etc., are wary about being subject, not because they're worried about being debating ideas. People like myself love debating ideas, and all the academics I know, that's part of what we do. But it's about the sort of almost personal attacks that have come out that I think many people perhaps, and that's something the Judicial Services Commission needs to rethink its approach and ensuring that questions are focused on your ability to do the job and ensuring that the best people reach the highest court of our land.
Well, hopefully that conversation will begin after this interview. But, Professor, I'd like to switch things up and invite you to give us your thoughts on the week-long debate that we've had as a part of the national discourse, really, the debate concerning Tourism Minister Lindiwe Sisulu's penned piece, as well as the acting Chief Justice's response to it. Firstly, did you expect the acting CJ to call a media briefing in reaction to the piece?
It's unusual for a judiciary often to respond to attacks directly on themselves, and often the judiciary has maintained a sort of what often people call as a silent dignity. But I think it's entirely appropriate, in fact, for the judiciary to respond to political attacks on their integrity, on the institution itself. The judiciary, of course, should be open to criticism. Again, that's part of what people across the political spectrum and academics specifically, that's part of my job, is to engage with the judgments, to critique it when we think they're wrong, to show it flaws in their reasoning. But when there's an attack on the character of the judges themselves, right? Remember, Minister Sisulu was actually saying that these judges have somehow colonized minds without specifying what exactly she meant, without examining any judgments in any way, and therefore in some ways undermining respect in the judiciary itself. And remember, she's also a senior minister in the government. She's been for many, many years in the government. She's also a senior person in the ruling party of our country, the African National Congress. So in that light, it seems to me it was entirely appropriate for the acting Chief Justice to actually step in and say and defend the integrity of the judiciary. That's what a Chief Justice must do, to ensure the independence of the judges and to ensure that the integrity of our judiciary is maintained. There is no good reason to impugn the integrity of our judges. If Minister Sisulu dislikes a particular judgment, it seems that from subsequent responses she didn't like the majority judgment against Jacob Zuma, right, then she must critique those specific judgments, but not make some broad critique impugning the integrity of the judges and their abilities. That is unacceptable, and I think that it was entirely appropriate for the acting Chief Justice to respond in the way he did.
Right. Well, Professor, thank you so much. We are going to have to leave it there. That's Professor David Bilchitz talking to us there about appointments to the Constitutional Court, making the call for academics to be considered as well. Now,